What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and we are back with Justice Incarnate, and single-handedly, DC's going to retcon their entire multiverse and everything. So this is going to be a pretty important video that we're doing here. But the thing about this is we basically pick up immediately after the events of the last video, right? Where we had like the Batwoman who laughs. And remember, she's an agent of the Great Darkness, so she was here to basically snatch up the crack in the multiverse. That if the crack in the multiverse is obtained by the Great Darkness, which is basically absolute evil, that it would be able to enter into the positive multiverse and basically destroy everything in existence, or at least turn it all back into nothingness again. Now, of course, the whole thing with Batwoman who laughs, it's more of a cameo than anything else, because once the crack in the multiverse escapes her clutches, she really just kind of retreats, right? She basically just takes off. That's really all we get from her. We don't really get a whole lot going on with her character. So it was really just a teaser to see whether or not there was any interest in the Batwoman who laughs from the DC fan base, and that was effectively it. The following this, one of the things that we had talked about is that you had President Superman and you had Dr. Multiverse who had been lost in a reality, that you also had Captain Carrot who had been lost in his own reality. Because of everything that goes on with his story, we're going to focus almost exclusively on President Superman and Dr. Multiverse. And so what ends up going on is they basically arrive at Earth 33. Now, those individuals out there who are eagle-eyed comic book readers, you know that Earth 33 is basically the world of Superboy Prime. It's the real world, like the world that we live in DC Comics. The problem with this is that Superboy Prime doesn't show up once, and a lot of that's probably because his story's done, right? DC is basically done creating content with him. That may change at some future point in time, but for right now, you don't really see him at all. Instead, it's basically President Superman and Dr. Multiverse trying to find a way out of this universe, but because it's the real world, their powers are basically nullified. And that's one of the things to keep in mind, is that Superboy Prime is the only superhero that ever came from Earth 33. There's nobody else besides him. And so with it being kind of the real world, they can't fly, they can't do any of the stuff they normally do, and people honestly think they're just dressed in cosplay. But they come to the realization that the only way for them to escape, the only way for them to get out and really even be able to communicate with the other members of the Justice Incarnate team, is to actually create superheroes. And the reason why, and this is one of those Grant Morrison meta commentary things that's being used by Joshua Williamson here, the reason why is because in the real world, we create comics. So if you imagine that there is a universe out there where all of this is taking place, whatever it is that you write will become true, right? That'll become the reality of their story. And so the intention here is to basically craft a story in a way that allows them to return. And what ends up going on is that the days sort of pass. It's literally day 1, then you jump to day 7, you jump to day 23, right? You get to like day 65 and so on and so forth. But it's just one of these things where they're stuck here for a pretty lengthy period of time, months on end. So what ends up going on here is President Superman ends up getting a hold of a guy named Ulrich Saxman, who is an actual editor at DC Comics. And the idea here is that Ulrich Saxman can actually help them craft a comic in order to have that comic printed and for that comic to become reality. The funny thing about this is that as they tell him their story, he simply goes back to his office and he starts working on notes. And so when they end up meeting up with him, the notes basically indicate that Darkseid has to win, right? That Darkseid is going to win. And it's one of those funny things because as they have this conversation, they're just kind of like, no, that's not going to happen. But the funny thing is Ulrich Saxman kind of chimes in and says, look, I totally get your all story. I get everything that's going on. And we do have to get you back to your reality. That's true. We have to get you back to your normalcy. But we also have to sell comics. And whenever Darkseid wins, we sell comics. So at the end of the day, for us here at DC Comics, making money is the name of the game. Everything else is secondary. And that's kind of the funny thing, because in the middle of this conversation, you basically end up having Avery, who of course, again, is the version of the Flash they're using, kind of another Flash who existed in the main DC universe. That Flash actually managed to get a hold of Thomas Wayne Batman. And in turn, now they're all basically going forward and literally reaching out to President Superman and Dr. Multiverse. And it's one of those cool things because what Avery does is when she's told by Dr. Multiverse, like, we can't use our powers here, her response is, actually you can. You just don't believe that you can, because in the real world, whatever you believe, it's a reality, right? Your fears, your concerns, those become tangible things. And so if the fear when you first arrived here was, we can't use our powers, that becomes your reality. So the truth is, you can use them. It's just nobody ever really uses powers on Earth Prime and Earth 33. So as a result of that, you can't use yours, or at least you believe you can't. But the truth about it is they basically say, like, we found the crack in the multiverse, you have to come with us. And that's when Ulrich Saxman reveals his true identity, which is that he's actually Darkseid, which is amazing because Darkseid was stuck here in this reality posing as a regular human, which really begs the question, who at DC Comics is actually Darkseid in disguise? I don't know if that's true. I don't know anything about this guy. I didn't even know he was an editor until I read this story. And I don't even know if he is actually an editor at DC Comics. It just seems like he is, so I just went ahead and rolled with it. But the thing about this is they basically end up transitioning with Darkseid to the Earth that Captain Carrot's on, and this is the Earth where the actual crack in the multiverse is at. Now remember, the crack in the multiverse is a tangible thing. If you possess it, you can enter in and out of any multiverse that you want to. And that's a new concept because DC is bringing in this idea that there are now multiple multiverses in DC Comics as opposed to one multiverse with multiple universes in it. And so this is actually a pretty cool moment because what ends up happening is Dr. Multiverse actually ends up snatching up the crack in the multiverse, and at that point, Darkseid's satisfied. And the reason why is because she's basically fulfilling this role where she can contain the crack in the multiverse, but she can't hold it forever. And that's the cool thing, is because what she ends up basically revealing here is essentially this giant retcon of the multiverse. Everything we thought we knew is not actually correct. And this is one of the most significant moments in DC Comics, right? It's this really, really cool thing because what she basically reveals is that Darkseid does have to win. By possessing the crack in the multiverse, she now has full knowledge of the entire multiverse's past, everything going on with the multiverse, and she knows how things have to transpire. And what she says is, and really kind of giving us this story, which again is a giant retcon, she basically says that like in the beginning, there was basically just darkness, right? There was no life or anything like that, but the presence or God effectively created the multiverse as it existed. And what it did is it brought light to the dark, and it basically forced the great darkness to essentially recede, right? To basically retreat. Now, one of the things that I want to specify here is that we have to act as though everything with Perpetua doesn't exist, that it never happened and was never written by DC Comics, because you're never going to see her referenced once over the course of this new retcon that DC's doing. So they're literally undoing it all, and they're kind of reworking the whole multiverse or the history of the multiverse and everything else. But the thing about this is that we're told with the original Crisis on Infinite Earths event, right? That story had its own plot story, right? It had its own plot line. The idea behind it is that the Anti-Monitor basically wanted to destroy the positive matter multiverse, essentially the multiverse as it existed, by basically spreading antimatter everywhere, right? Like just bringing it into it all. What the Anti-Monitor didn't know is that it was being used by the Great Darkness. Now, ultimately, a truce was brokered between the Great Darkness and basically God, or the light, if you want to call that, the source. And what it meant is that they would basically stay hands off. That with the destruction of the multiverse and the creation of what we call New Earth in DC Comics, basically everything after the events of Crisis on Infinite Earths until Infinite Crisis, that it brokered a truce, that the Great Darkness would basically stay away, that it would sleep, it would basically go into hibernation, and that the light or the source or God, whatever you want to call it, would be the one that would basically have its time to reign. And the result of this is that the Great Darkness seemed to do exactly that, except it didn't. The influence of the Great Darkness was consistently felt, that when it came to these various beings who popped up, for example, the events of Infinite Crisis, the idea that the multiverse had basically been recreated, that what it did is it disrupted the truce between the Great Darkness and God. And the result of that is the Great Darkness began to make its move again, that it started impacting everybody. Like we're literally told, ultimately, these relentless attacks culminated in another crisis that forced the lone multiverse to evolve into what we now know as the new multiverse. That was Infinite Crisis, which broke the truce between the Great Darkness and the light, that monitors were dispatched by the light to contain and limit the new multiverse to an orrery of 52 worlds in the hopes of slowing the Great Darkness's awakening. So quite literally, the Great Darkness went to sleep after the events of Crisis on Infinite Earths, but with something like the multiverse being reborn, that's enough to wake it up. And where normally this would lead to the formation of an infinite number of universes across the multiverse, what Joshua Williamson is establishing here is that it was only ever 52 worlds. That was it. It was literally contained to 52 worlds in the multiverse, because if there were any more than 52, if it were to continue growing, the Great Darkness would wake up and the war between the light and the dark would be on yet again. The other part of this is that Darkseid returned as a result of the events of Infinite Crisis, that he was one of the few who was aware of the existence of the Great Darkness, and that Darkseid was instrumental in stopping the Anti-Monitor purging the first crisis. that the god of all evil, Darkseid, understood a truth about the great darkness that few ever would, that it does not care for good or evil, nor life or death, that the great darkness only wants nothing to be everything once more, and that Darkseid manipulated prophecy and destiny to trigger a final crisis. So what Joshua Williamson is saying here is that in reality, the events of Final Crisis were triggered by Darkseid in order to find a way to end the great darkness, right? Or at least capture the great darkness. That the great darkness has been behind everything, right? And literally we're told here, all of this was designed to draw out the great darkness so the god of evil could truly control everything. There was only one thing Darkseid did not count on, that his scheme succeeded, but at the cost of his own life, when Batman basically killed him at the end of Final Crisis. And that as the multiverse was at its weakest, in a moment of the lonely silence, right before a desperate Hail Mary to save it with a wish on a miracle machine, the great darkness revealed itself to Superman in the form of Mandrake. So for those of you guys who aren't really familiar with that, Mandrake was kind of like the first monitor. During the events of Final Crisis, Mandrake was the most powerful of all the monitors. And in fact, Mandrake ended up going toe-to-toe with Superman and an entire army of Superman at the same time. The guy was ridiculously powerful. But the reason why all of this matters is because over the years in DC Comics, we got Crisis on Infinite Earths, which destroyed the multiverse. We got Infinite Crisis, which brought it back, albeit a different version of the multiverse. And then Final Crisis, which made the superheroes aware of the multiverse's existence. But all of these seem to be just disconnected, right? They all had their own individual stories, and there was no unifying theme among all these Crisis events outside of the fact that they would either reboot the entirety of the DC landscape, or they would rework the landscape, or something along those lines. The truth about what Joshua Williamson is doing here is he's saying that every single Crisis event was influenced in some capacity by the great darkness, which wasn't necessarily awake. It was simply just its essence permeating throughout everything. So it's like releasing a drop of ink in a glass of water. It's going to impact everything else, right? It's literally going to change the color of that water. And so the results of this is that with everything that had gone on following the events of Infinite Crisis and Final Crisis, the great darkness basically woke up, and it came to the realization that it does have one absolute enemy across the entirety of the multiverse, absent basically God, which was superheroes. That is always superheroes that are stopping the great darkness from coming into existence. Now, one of the more controversial statements that's going to be made here, and I don't know how people are going to respond to this, is that what the great darkness did is that in order to basically demoralize and even to a degree reduce the power of superheroes, is that during the Flashpoint event, that in DC Comics we got the introduction of Dr. Manhattan from the Watchmen universe. And what Dr. Manhattan did is he basically modified history so that like 10 years were missing from the entire history of superheroes. There was just this giant gap, and it was all due to the machinations of Dr. Manhattan. What we're being told here by Joshua Williamson is that that was done by the great darkness. The great darkness manipulated Dr. Manhattan and basically screwed everything up. So he was the one behind it all, right? The great darkness has been behind everything every step of the way ever since the first Crisis on Infinite Earths event. And the result of this is that all these different scenarios that had unfolded, all these things that had taken place, even during the New 52, when Darkseid had basically been woken up and then gone on a campaign, everything that Darkseid had done when DC rebooted in the New 52, running all the way up until now, has been trying to find a way to seize control of the great darkness so he can control everything in existence. And the reality of this, even going into like Dark Knight's Metal, right? The Batman Who Laughs and all that stuff. Barbados, who was an agent of the great darkness, yet again an instance where the great darkness was trying to destroy the multiverse, trying to seize control, when Darkseid was imprisoned basically on Earth Omega, this kind of lone universe that existed out there that was just a heinously dark place, where he ultimately killed his captors and then escaped and was back on the hunt to try to find a way to stop the great darkness. It's all been him, right? It's all been Darkseid. And that's where Dr. Multiverse tells us this whole story and says, okay, that's why Darkseid has to win. Because the reality here is that if Darkseid gets the crack in the multiverse, and then Darkseid uses the crack in the multiverse to seize control of the great darkness, then ultimately we may kind of stand a chance potentially against Darkseid, or at least we could defeat him. But if the great darkness gets the crack in the multiverse and the great darkness enters our positive multiverse, there's no reasoning with it. There's no talking it down. There's no defeating it. There's nothing we can do here. We will all perish. We will all die, and that'll be the end of it. So we literally have to ally ourselves with one evil that we could potentially defeat to stop a greater evil that we have no chance of defeating. And that's ultimately exactly how things seem to play out. That one of the things that goes on here is you literally have an attempt by the different members of Justice Incarnate to basically face off against the forces of Darkseid and at least to try to stop Darkseid himself, albeit literally sealing their destiny. It's the worst thing they could do here, but in the end, they're like, we ally ourselves with good and yada, yada, yada. The reality here is that in order to win, they are going to have to join with Darkseid. There's no way to stop the coming of the Great Darkness unless they do that. Now, there is also an attempt by Thomas Wayne Batman. Remember, that's the Batman from the Flashpoint universe, from an alternate reality, that Thomas Wayne tries to kill Dr. Multiverse. And that's when it's basically revealed to us, and really even revealed by Darkseid, that the Great Darkness has seized control of Thomas Wayne Batman. Now it has all the information that Thomas Wayne Batman had. And so ultimately Darkseid says there's no way to basically get around this. There's no way to undo the influence of the Great Darkness on Thomas Wayne. He has to die. And using his Omega beams, he incinerates Thomas Wayne on the spot, literally kills him. And just, that's it. There's no more Thomas Wayne anymore, which seems to be Joshua Williamson's way of basically getting rid of him. Following that, he ends up just taking out each member of the Justice Incarnate, seizes control of Dr. Multiverse, and steals the crack of the multiverse directly away from her. And now in Darkseid's possession, the other part of this is that back on Earth 7, we have the emergence of the Empty Hand. Now, if we were to apply this to like Marvel terms, if the Great Darkness were Galactus, the Empty Hand is the Silver Surfer. He's an agent of the Great Darkness. Now, he is astronomically powerful. One thing that I want to specify here, when it comes to the hierarchy of power in DC Comics, this guy's up there. This guy is way up there. Like, the Empty Hand is ridiculously OP. There's virtually nothing this guy can't do compared to pretty much anything that any of the superheroes can do, right? This guy could demolish Superman without even thinking about it, right? Like literally, that's one of the things to know. Superman's powerful, right? Superman's incredibly powerful. This guy would demolish him and be home in time for cornflakes. That's just one thing to understand. This guy's that OP. But the funny thing about this is also true form Darkseid. It's every version of Darkseid merged into one. This is the most powerful Darkseid's ever been. Possessing the crack in the multiverse, Darkseid literally becomes full of hubris. He makes a gambit and he stabs the Empty Hand with the crack in the multiverse. In doing this, the belief of Darkseid is it'll destroy the Empty Hand, and that by doing that, it leaves the landscape open for Darkseid to then seize control of the Great Darkness. The entire opposite happens, and in fact, the Empty Hand just reveals you have been a great puppet, Darkseid. You have done exactly as you were supposed to do, and you never even knew that was the case. That the reality here is Darkseid stabbing the Empty Hand with the crack in the multiverse is not going to kill the Empty Hand, and is not going to allow him to conquer and control the Great Darkness. Instead, he literally delivered the crack to the Great Darkness itself. The Empty Hand is beyond this level of death, right? It's beyond this level of power. It's too powerful, right? It's like stabbing the Incredible Hulk with a knife. Nothing's gonna happen, right? And if anything, all you're gonna do is piss him off. And that's exactly what happens, right? Literally, the Empty Hand is like, my hand is no longer empty. And seizing control of the Great Crack literally takes out Darkseid. And so one of the things that you get is the Empty Hand basically forming a portal, right? Like literally opening a portal to get to the Great Darkness, and then actually taunts Darkseid and is like, if you dare, an invitation beckons, right? Empty is my hand. Do you live up to the challenge? And Darkseid, always one that is just exceedingly prideful, ends up daring and enters into the portal and then is immediately confronted by the Great Darkness. Now, here's a funny thing about this. Darkseid's ridiculously powerful. Darkseid is a ridiculously OP force of energy. This guy is on a whole nother level. When he gets in there, he starts screaming at the Great Darkness, right? Face me. And ultimately, the Great Darkness is just like, control is an illusion, right? Your mind is already mine. Behold my right hand, the one that is empty, the one that takes. But consider the left hand, the one that closed, the unknown fist that destroys. And when Darkseid's just like, I am no puppet, I am nobody to be manipulated, the Great Darkness is just like, what you want is irrelevant. It doesn't matter. The fist cannot say to the body, I have no need of you. And so what this basically means is when Darkseid entered into the realm of the Great Darkness, he was immediately overtaken. He never stood a chance. He never had the chance to overtake the Great Darkness. There was no possibility there. I mean, it's just something to grasp here, right? I mean, it's a ridiculous concept, right? That there is a force of energy out there that is so astronomically powerful that the entire possibility of Darkseid even potentially considering the option of even having a chance was nullified the instant that he met it, right? There was nothing he ever could have done. It's so insane. And so ultimately what ends up happening is you basically have the Justice Incarnate that come to the realization, okay, Darkseid's out of the picture and now he's an agent of the Great Darkness. Like, there's nothing we can do there, right? And so their whole thing is, we came here to basically save Barry Allen. We have to go find Barry. We have to enter into whatever reality he's in order to locate him. And ultimately they do, right? they passed through the portal. Now, one of the things to know here is that with Darkseid's situation, the portal led him to the Great Darkness. That doesn't necessarily seem to be the case, right? The portal seems to only ever lead to one of two places. The first is the Otherworld universe, which we know nothing about. The only thing we know about it is what you're about to see here in a second. The other location is the realm of the Great Darkness. Now, which one you end up going to, I don't know if it's based on your alignment with the light or the dark, but regardless, when they end up emerging in this Otherworld place, that they basically get there, and of course, they're taken by Wallace West, the new 52 version of Wally West. They're brought to basically Barry Allen, and they immediately try to confront him, right? Because Barry doesn't know who they are. He's never seen them, never heard of them. He's like, I have no idea what's going on. Now, obviously, this is a result of the fact that this place has basically screwed up Barry's mind, because Barry does know who these people are, or at least some of them. I don't think he knows who Dr. Multiverse is, but he does know who President Superman is, and he absolutely knows who Captain Carrot is. Captain Carrot's a super bunny, but he should know exactly who Captain Carrot is. But the thing about this is that when they try to get Barry Allen away from this place, he immediately turns against them, literally knocks him off guard, and then races back into the house, and that's it. And that's when Pariah makes his appearance. Now, we haven't talked a whole lot about his character. We did at the beginning, or at least towards the end of the Justice League story that we did before this. For those of you guys who aren't familiar with Pariah, he's ridiculously OP, and in fact, we'll find out how powerful he is here in a second, because as soon as he emerges, Dr. Multiverse is like, we have to go. Like, if we stay here, this is going to be the end of it. She's so terrified of this guy, she literally snatches up the Justice Incarnate and flees, right? Just takes off, literally teleports them out of there. And when the whole question is, okay, why did we do this? Because literally as they teleport out, they just jump. They don't even have a destination. She has no idea where she's taking them. This literally anywhere is better than here with this guy. Now, of course, you do also have the remainder of the Justice Incarnate that are basically trying to escape the Great Darkness, which is now influencing and spreading into the positive multiverse. So it's literally entering in, right? I mean, there's nothing that can be done now. Like, it's entering into the positive multiverse. The reserve members of the Justice Incarnate basically rescue the main team. And when President Calvin or President Superman is like, why did you take us away from there? We were supposed to save Barry Allen. She's like, no, you don't understand. That guy is more powerful than the Empty Hand and Darkseid combined. That guy's on a whole new level of power. It's like he's the voice of the Great Darkness. But whatever it is that's going on with that guy, he's on a whole different level. We never even remotely stood a chance. And if he had touched us, we would have ended up just like Barry Allen. We would have been stuck there. There would have been nobody to save the day. And so ultimately, with the Great Darkness spreading throughout the multiverse, President Superman says, okay, fine, there's only one place for us to go. We have to go find the Justice League. But what it does is it switches over to the Great Darkness, which literally has ensnared some of the most powerful beings in existence under its control. We're talking about like Necron, who is quite literally the leader of the Black Lanterns, right? Represents death in a lot of different ways. That you have the Empty Hand who's there, of course. You also have Eclipso, who's basically the wrath of God. And then you've got Darkseid, who's also ensnared as well. So these are ridiculously powerful forces that are all being controlled by the Great Darkness. Just to give you guys an understanding, any one of these guys is more than enough to take on a Justice League. More than enough to be able to handle the Justice League. And even the Justice League would probably struggle against one of these guys, right? Like if they weren't just outright defeated. Now you're talking about an army of them, and that army is only going to get larger. So with that being said, guys, we're going to bring this video to an end. Thank you all for watching, and I will catch you all later. Peace.